Welcome to Don't Chuck It Up, the podcast where we help students and families navigate the wild journey of the college search and applying to colleges without breaking a sweat. I'm your host, Chuck, and today we're talking about going to college in the UK. Yes, it's time to talk about heading across the pond and doing higher education in the United Kingdom. Of course, I am not an expert in this at all. And truth be told, I have not visited the UK yet. I've been to the rest of Europe, so I needed to bring in an expert. So today, my guest is Terry Mady-Grove. She's an independent educational consultant and a certified educational planner, and I'm excited to have Terry join us here on the Don't Chuck It Up podcast. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Chuck. I'm amazed. I didn't realize you'd never been to the UK, so this will be a little bit of an education for you too.
I know, this is going to be exciting. I have lived in mainland Europe, so I mean, I am familiar with Europe, and I have done virtual visits for colleges in the UK, but my physical body has not landed on the islands just yet. So before we dive into the UK, which I'm super excited about this topic because I get students that ask me about it all the time, and I am fairly clueless on how the UCAS system works. Let's introduce you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, of course. So again, Terry Mady-Grove, Uncharted University Consultants. I'm a lawyer by background. I practiced for about 25 years in corporate law and then decided I really want to do something different. So I did something different and I got a master's in teaching English. I went through the whole student teaching process and then decided I actually hate this. But what I did like was working one-on-one with high school students. So then I went on to, as you said, become a certified educational planner. I got a certificate through the UC Irvine program, and I've been now helping students for about 15 years. I actually teach in that program too.
Yeah, you've really kind of come full circle within that program. You started off as a student in it, and now you are an instructor helping other people learn how to become independent educational consultants and do this work that we so love. On a side note, with your lawyer background, I'm currently watching the show Suits, which is all about being lawyers, and I'm thoroughly entertained by that. So that's a side comment that I was like, oh, yeah, that's my interaction with corporate law is watching the show Suits. So,
it's so realistic.
That's a different topic for a different day. We can talk about law and the show Suits, but let's first dive into the UK. And of course, we need to first start off with some geography because, like many people, we probably don't know what the UK is. So what is the United Kingdom?
Yes, actually, that's a great question because it does come up all the time. So it's actually 4 countries, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. And of course, we've all heard of the UK, so it's maybe surprising to know that it's a relatively small geographic area. I mean, I think compared to the US, it's actually smaller than about a dozen states in the US. But it is quite diverse with major cities like London, Edinburgh, Cardiff, and in addition, it's islands. So there are universities that are right on the sea, there are universities in small towns, and there are universities in remote locations.
Yeah, now these are islands, but I don't want students to think that this is like the island of Puerto Rico or the island of Jamaica, where you're going to have, palm trees and sandy beaches. This is the pure definition of an island that water surrounds it on all sides. So again, we're talking about England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So I think what a lot of people are wondering, in the United States, as you and I know, there are nearly 3,000 colleges and universities. Why would anyone want to go study abroad, and why would they want to go to college specifically in the UK?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I get that question all the time from families when I bring this up, if they hadn't brought it up to me first. And I often bring this up to families who are looking for something different. So sometimes students are in high school and they've been kind of floundering, or they're just always seeing the same people. They want different opinions. They want a different point of view. So they're looking for something other than the universities or colleges where their peers are going. And a second big factor that a lot of parents like is also the cost. So a private university in the United States, just the tuition alone can be between $50,000 and $60,000 a year.
Hmm.
But in the UK, it's more like $30,000 to $50,000 for an international student. Plus, if a student studies in England, Wales, or Northern Ireland, the full course is only 3 years. So you're automatically saving 1 year's worth of tuition in addition to the lower tuition cost itself. Scotland's a little bit different. We'll talk about that in a second, but Scotland's a bit of a hybrid between the US and the rest of the UK. So it's 4 years.
Yeah, I think
Another reason, I'm sorry.
I was going to say that's a great point right there, is that the education layout is just very different in the UK, and I don't think people are aware that different countries have different educational systems. I think a lot of people just think, well, college is just 4 years,
Yes.
and that's not true. As you mentioned, for most of the UK, it's actually a 3-year system.
Yes, and the reason for that is because the US actually has a completely different education system than literally the rest of the world. So when I work with international students coming to the US, I often have to explain what liberal arts is. It's
Yeah.
really not a concept that is widely known outside the US. And so the reason that some of the universities in the UK are shorter is because most of the world has a more focused education system when they're younger. So students might be geared towards studying, let's say, science, and they study that a lot in a lot more focused fashion. So that when they're going to university, they already have a little bit more of a background than some US students. But another reason that students think about studying in the UK is diversity. So, the UK is home to these world-renowned universities, but as I said, it's kind of a relatively small place. So
Yeah.
there are students that are applying from all over the world. So, by virtue of being a US student, if you study in the UK, of course, there'll be diversity because you'll be meeting students from the UK itself, but you'll also be meeting students from around the world.
Hmm?
There are a
Yeah.
couple of other factors too. So high retention rates. So people in the US may not realize that a lot of times when colleges quote their graduation rates, they're giving you a 6-year rate, not a 4-year rate. And those rates are still relatively low. But in the UK, typically when students start out as a first-year student, they end their course within that 3 or 4 year time frame. And so the high retention rates are very attractive to families who want their children to graduate within a certain period of time. Also lowers the cost too. Again, if you're going to college for 6 years potentially in the US, that's a big difference.
I think that is a point that a lot of U.S. parents don't even realize, is that when
Yes,
colleges and universities talk about graduation rates, and colleges will say, 80% of our students graduate on time. Well, on time actually for the federal government here in the United States is 6 years, not 4 years.
exactly.
So higher ed is operating on a 6-year calendar versus a 4-year calendar. Now, colleges do also have a 4-year graduation rate, but many times you have to kind of ask and press for that and say, well, what
That's
about
right.
your 4-year graduation rate? And then parents learn that a lot of colleges, in particular, many of the very popular public universities, have a significantly lower 4-year graduation rate. And that means that you're possibly going to be paying for an extra semester, an extra year, or even an extra couple of years here in the United States. So with the
Absolutely.
UK system, now you've got not a guarantee, but you have a much higher likelihood of graduating in 3 years, maybe 4 if you're talking Scotland, but the
Yes.
time frame is much more contained and therefore easier to budget.
Absolutely. And it's just what's expected in the UK. I mean, that's just that's why most of the students do graduate within that time frame. And there are two other reasons why I think a student might consider the UK. One is research. So in the US right now, we're having problems with funding research, as we know. But even if that weren't the case, the UK has always had a real bent towards research. So the universities are very research oriented. So if students want to do research, and I don't mean just scientific research, but if they
Right.
want to research, history or whatever, there's a real orientation towards that.
Yes.
And then my final point is history. So some of the universities are relatively new. Some are truly ancient. In fact, in Scotland, there are 4 universities that are literally known as the ancient universities. So St. Andrews, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, that's what they're called, ancient universities. They've been around for 600 or more years. So even if a student were to go to a newer university, the UK itself is so rich in history that students are often really attracted to that.
Yeah, I think you really make a great point also with the research part of it is that, and I think that's partially amplified in the UK because of the smaller size of the universities. Like we're not seeing institutions in the UK that are 50, 60, 70,000 students. They are much smaller in size, which allows for students to get engaged with research at a much higher level and a much easier time. But yeah, I love the history part. I think some students and families mean that stuff hasn't been updated and you're going to stay in a, academic building that is 600 years old with no updates. And I'm like, no, they've updated stuff. It just means that the history of the university extends for hundreds of years. But if you like the Hogwarts vibe, you definitely can get that at several places throughout the UK.
Absolutely. And another way that the UK, speaking of updates, has really updated is in their food. So, a lot of people think of the UK as having bland, boring food. That is completely not the case anymore. There's such an emphasis on sustainability and local food and health that it's really a pleasure to have the food in the UK now.
Wonderful. So I know one of the worries that I have heard from students and parents who are considering sending their student to the UK or even any country that is not the United States for college is, will my student be able to get a job in the United States if they have a degree from the UK or any other country?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really valid concern, of course. And families do ask that. They ask that about schools in the US too. But
Fair.
particularly if you're going, all the way out of the country, all the way across the ocean, you really want to make sure you're getting a bang for your buck. So I can say that UK graduates absolutely do get jobs in the US. And there are several reasons. One is that UK graduates stand out from their peers in the US job market. Employers are interested in graduates who've done something a little bit different and also had a global experience.
Hmm.
So if you're an employer and you're looking at hundreds of resumes, what's going to make someone stand out? Well, that UK degree will help. Um, and also, a lot of the degrees in the UK are industry led. So that basically means that the UK universities collaborate with industry, major corporations, and they try to find out what those industries need. And then they gear a lot of their instruction towards that need. So many students in the UK have an internship, a paid internship built right into their course. It's part of their graduation requirements. So I know here in the US, some of the schools that have the co-op programs are becoming very, very popular.
Yeah.
In the UK, it's just part of most classes to begin with. So that also makes a student really stand out to an employer. And also, if a student wanted for some reason to stay in the UK, if they fell in love, what's really nice about the UK also is that for undergraduates, they can stay in the UK for 18 months post graduation. That's just part of their visa. And so that makes life much easier if they want to take a little bit of time to find the right job.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. If parents are trying to wrap their heads around this, I would say the 3-year UK education college process is kind of like if you look at a technical college where they're getting hands-on training and the university, which is a 4-year experience, it's kind of a hybrid of the two and now squished into 3 years for the most part. So it's a bit of a different challenge. I think one of the challenges that parents are worried about is like, what if they're thinking about going into a higher level area such as medicine or law? Is the UK still an option for someone who's considering a higher level degree?
Yeah, now that is a very, very good point. So, medicine, veterinary studies, and dentistry are all undergraduate degrees in the UK. They're 6-year programs. So, if you get into one of those programs, that's all you're studying, and you're studying for 6 years, and you end up with the same professional degree as if you were in the US for 4 years undergrad and then 4 years of the advanced degree.
Right.
But it's not seamless. So if you want to study one of those areas, you really have to investigate the UK university and see what affiliations they have with residencies in the US, how the degree transfers over. That is a degree that is much less seamless than many of the other degrees that, or any of the other degrees, really. As far as law goes, that's a little bit easier depending upon the state that you want to study in. So law also is an undergraduate degree, but you can finish your law degree and then take the bar exam in
Right.
many states without going through law school.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the caveat to that is, do you have the same kind of connections to law firms and so on that a U.S. law school would? Not necessarily. So those types of degrees really have to be explored with the university. One of the great things about the UK universities is that they are very open to speaking to students or parents about any of these things. So in the US, it might be a little bit more difficult to actually speak to the appropriate person because the person that you would normally speak to in the US is the admissions person, the person
Yep.
reading your application. That's completely different in the UK. The people that read the applications often are the faculty. So the person that you would speak to ask those sorts of technical questions is not someone who's reading your application. So a student doesn't have to be sort of nervous about that interaction.
Mm-hmm. I think that's excellent advice, and I think it's things that parents and students need to consider and really explore those options if they want to go that route. As you said, it's not impossible, but people really need to make sure that they cross their T's and dot their I's before they
Exactly.
head that direction, just to make sure that they understand what they're getting into. And I don't want students to get surprised by, oh, wait, this isn't going to work for the law firm that I have been dreaming to work for my entire life. Because they don't usually take British, law type experience. So
Where they don't recruit from that
right,
university
right.
necessarily.
So
Yeah.
just saying that, think ahead a little bit to make sure that will all work for you. So as students and parents are listening to this, they're probably going, okay, this sounds interesting. 3 years of education for the most part. Some are for lower cost. So who is a good candidate that should be really going, okay, I should explore this route and put this as a possible option for myself in the future?
Yes. And just like in the US, there are good candidates for, let's say, for small liberal arts universities, and there are good candidates for the huge rah-rah universities. And one student is not typically a good candidate for both.
True.
So it's the same for a student applying to the UK. It's not right for everyone, but it is right for a very independent and mature student. So even the most independent student can still become even more self-reliant when they're out of their comfort zone. But a student has to start off that way.
Yeah.
There's no real coddling in the UK. If typically a professor will give out a syllabus at the beginning of the semester, and they'll expect that the student knows what's on that syllabus, and they're not going to be kind of reiterating that every week. Next week we have this due. It's not that sort of thing. You're treated as an adult. Also, you have to be adaptable. So you can't expect that everything's going to be the same as home. Your favorite meal might not be available in the UK.
Nope.
Things are going, language is going to be a little bit different. You'll encounter different from a wide variety of backgrounds. So you have to be someone who can adapt to different situations. I would also suggest that it's really good for a student who likes to travel. So while I love the UK, and there are certainly many places to travel in the UK, you also can travel so inexpensively on Ryanair or EasyJet, from the major airports in the UK to so many places in Europe for nothing. It's not really that unusual to get a flight for $30 or $40 and go someplace completely different. So I think that's very helpful. And of course, that student has to appreciate different cultures and want to be surrounded by different cultures. But I think the most important thing, in addition to everything else I just said, is that the student really does have to know what they want to study, because they apply directly to the major. There are no gen ed requirements, no distribution requirements. So the good side is, if you, let's say, don't like math and you decide to major in French, you will never take a math class ever. So that's, for me, that would be wonderful. But the downside for that is, if you're a student that really doesn't know what they want to study and they want to explore, the UK is probably not for you.
Right. Yeah, I think you pointed out a lot of great things, both as who should be thinking about going to a college in the UK and starting to talk about how that university experience is different. You're really correct that students need to be self-driven, because in the United States, there are lots of staff on a college campus that make sure that students are doing okay. And that's everything from mental health to wellness to just academic support staff. And those are not as common at a UK college. So you really have to be a student who's on top of their syllabus and knows what's going on, and be really motivated. I think one of the other ones is, this year we're seeing a lot of students with homesickness here in the United States. They've gone to college, and 2-3 weeks in, they're going, oh, I can't do this. I went too far away from home. And then they're asking to come back. If you're going to college in the UK, that's a big financial investment to get yourself over there. So you better be used to it. So I would encourage, if a student's considering the UK, they really should have had international travel experience already. So this should not be your first adventure outside of the United States, because you're going to have a lot of shock if you're not used to it. I've been to Europe a few times, and even now it's like, oh yeah, that's different. I forgot that's different. Okay, I have to be ready for that. And then I think your big point is, there isn't exploratory studies or undecided for the UK colleges and universities. They really are, you need to know what you're doing, and this is what you're doing. But as you said, the bright side is if you hate math, you can pick a major and never touch a math class again. Or if you love math and you only want to do math, and you never want to see an English class again, you can go that route as well. So it really is focused education in the British system. I think the other thing that we should start diving into is, how is the out-of-classroom experience different in the UK versus the United States? What is different for just the, classrooms are basically a classroom, although in the UK they're going to be much smaller. You're not going to see the 500-person lecture hall. But what about just the overall student experience? What's different in the UK versus the US?
Yeah, so just go back to one point that you made earlier about mental health, though. I have to say the UK has really upped its game when it comes to that. I think almost universally, it seems that students of this age have a lot of anxiety. And so the UK has really focused on that. And I do think their mental health services are actually pretty good. It's just that you have to advocate for yourself. You do in the
Yes.
US too. But that's becoming much more of a common accommodation in the UK. So I was happy to see that. But to your point about sort of social life outside of the classroom, so students have such a variety of things that they can do outside of the classroom. It does differ from the US. So there's absolutely no concept of Greek life. It doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean that clubs or what's known as societies don't exist.
Right.
They absolutely do, and they're just as vibrant as in schools in the US. So students can do things from, anything you would see in the US, from sports to academic clubs to kind of like squirrel watching, all these sort of silly things, that come up. This is all throughout the UK universities too.
Hmm.
But the big difference is, even though there are some world-class athletes at UK universities, there is no athletic recruiting.
Right.
So it's just not part of the admissions process. So the teams compete from one university to another, just like they do here. But again, students are admitted on their academics only. They're not admitted based upon athletics. There's also this unusual concept for the US of the student unions. So the student unions are more than buildings in the UK. The student union really refers to the organization that runs all of the student activities. And these student unions literally compete with each other. So there are rankings of which student unions are the best in the UK, meaning which ones have the most vibrant and active social life. So you can read those ranks. And that differs a little bit in the US. We don't really have that concept.
No, it was something that we brought over from the UK as we were creating the United States education system, but it kind of morphed as it was going through its creation here in the United States, and it didn't really end up the way I think they originally intended it a couple hundred years ago that way. I think you raised a great point about athletics, is that students are recruited on their academic merits and their academic fit for the UK. So that's different. In the United States, many colleges want to know about, okay, what are your extracurriculars, and what are all the other things that you've been doing? And really, for the UK and much of the rest of the world, it's really an academic admission process, not the holistic term that we use here. So another area that I want to talk about is, how is the UK systems different than the US as far as residence life? Like, I think a lot of students here are used to seeing on YouTube and on TikTok students living in residence halls and going to, having dorm life. What is living literally like in the UK?
Yeah, so it is quite different. So in the UK, that they're, instead of using the word dorm, they'll say accommodations. So that's sometimes a point of confusion. They're not talking about extra time on a test. So accommodations in the UK do differ from in the US. So there are some universities that have halls, which are dorms for first-year students. Nearly all of those have single bedrooms, so you don't have a roommate.
Mm-hmm.
And they're either catered or self-catered. So catered also is a term that's used a little bit differently there. So catered basically means that there's a dining hall,
Mm-hmm.
and self-catered means that you're cooking for yourself. So if a university does have a first-year residence hall, which, as I said, many do, there's usually a communal kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not necessarily just cooking for yourself. This also becomes part of the social life, where students cook dinners together. And it's a great way to meet people. And that's really the norm. And then often students will, after their first year, move into apartment style living. And in some of the major cities, like for instance in London, some of these apartment style buildings are not just for King's College or not just for Imperial. There'll be a whole bunch of students from all different universities in London living in one building, which is another great way to get to meet other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd great advice and information on all of that, because I want families to be aware is that for many colleges in the United States, residence life is kind of the norm, and there's an easy option and you can get residence life fairly simply. Whereas if you're going to the UK, you really have to be understanding of accommodations, and do the colleges and universities have accommodations, or are you going to be also not only applying to college, but you're also going to be looking for an apartment for those that do not have accommodations either on or near campus.
Yeah.
That's
Although a lot
a
of
big switch.
universities do offer accommodations for international students, even if there aren't accommodations for the entire student body for their first year.
Correct. And that's a great way also to interact with a bunch of, because you're going to be an international student when you're over there. So then you're going to be interacting with
Yes.
all the other international students from around the world. So that's a very different experience that way.
Mhm.
The other big thing, don't forget, people, is that when they're talking in the UK about football, that is not the brown ball with points on the ends. It's soccer.
Yes.
If you've never been to a European soccer game, though, it is quite the heck of an experience, and I think it's even more thrilling than American football. So look forward to that if you're heading
Yes.
over to the UK. So I think this is a lot of great information. So let us take a moment to get into how to research the colleges a little bit, and especially how to apply. So I want to make sure that we share a resource first with our YouTube viewers.
That you would be sharing. UCAS is terrific. UCAS is not only the application platform like the Common App in the US, but it also has a tremendous amount of information where you can easily research colleges. You can look up different subjects that you want to study and where those subjects are taught. It's really a fantastic resource. There's even instruction right on the UCAS website of how to fill out the application, what is needed for each application. So it's really kind of one-stop shopping. The UK university websites also tend to be pretty good with basically telling US students what they need to apply, because the application requirements are a little bit different depending upon what educational system you come from. In other words, from the US, they might mention that you need 2 APs and you need a 4 or a 5 on those APs. They're very specific like that, which is really helpful. But you're right, Chuck, there's no concept of a holistic process.
Right.
The entire basis for admission is based upon grades and or test scores.
Mhm.
So ACT, SAT, IB, AP, things of this nature. And it's very transparent. So that, in the US, you might see a website say that the average student has a 4.0, but in the UK, if they mention a grade, that's the grade you need to get in.
Mhm.
And if you have that grade, you're likely to get admitted. They're really looking for academic readiness. So like I said, like a 4 or a 5 on an AP in the particular subject you want to study shows the university that you have that academic readiness. It's so much easier to apply to UK schools than US schools. In the UK, you can only apply to 5 universities or programs. So by that, I mean, let's say there are 2 very similar programs at one particular university. That counts as 2, and then you have 3 others. Most students will apply on UCAS. There are some UK universities that are on the US Common App. You can use that, but even if you do, it's still a total of 5, no matter what. There's one academic reference letter. So, like here, we have a teacher write a recommendation. You would do the same thing for the UK, and that recommendation letter should be geared towards what you want to study. It's also much less expensive. So for all 5 applications total, it's about $35 or $40, depending upon the exchange rate. So that makes things just saner. And also a big difference, though, is that the idea of a conditional offer. So many students will get an unconditional offer, meaning that they're directly admitted to the university.
Mhm.
But for some students, that's not the case. So, for example, let's say a student is applying for a math course, and the requirement to meet the admissions criteria is a 5 on AP Calc BC. Well, that student might be taking that in their senior year. So they're not going to know whether they meet that requirement until July after their senior year. And if they do, then they're admitted. So that's the condition that they have to meet. But there's also no concept of early decision or early action.
Right.
And so there's applications with a couple of exceptions are due in January, and you hear in March or April. And those exceptions are the disciplines that we talked about earlier. So medicine, dentistry, veterinary medicine, but also Oxford and Cambridge. And you can only apply to Oxford or Cambridge, not both, which also makes things a little bit saner. And so the application process itself is just much more straightforward. There's only one essay. There are no supplemental essays. And the essay is essentially broken down into sections about why you want to study the course that you're studying. There are truly only a handful of universities that have any other requirements like an entrance exam or an interview, but they're few and far between.
Yeah, I was going to say, poking around on the website here, as I was showing people all the things that you were talking about, the only thing that really seems to be a different style of application process is if students are thinking of applying into the fine and performing arts. So if they're looking at a conservatory, that is going to be a very different application process. But it's all really laid out on the UCAS system. So this is ucas.com, which will be connected in the show notes as well. So feel free and check that out. It really does walk you through things. There's a lot of great resources on here to help you. I also love that they have a whole section on money and student life, so that people understand that, the euro is a different thing. So you got to kind of understand how the money works over there, and then also what student life is different and what to expect as a student compared to what it would be in the United States. So when you're working with students, do you encourage them to, because the application process is a very different timeline and a different response back, because students aren't hearing back until March or until April, do you encourage them to be applying both to U.S. colleges and UCAS UK schools?
Yeah, so unless the student has a British parent and they're incredibly familiar with the UK and they've always wanted to go there, the vast majority of my students will apply to both. And I think that just eases a lot of the stress, because the parents also may not necessarily think that the UK is a good idea, or the student may not necessarily think the US is a good idea. This kind of satisfies both. So yeah, I do. But even my students that only apply to the US, I don't have them apply to 30 schools like some people are doing now, which I think is crazy.
Well, and that's another topic for another day. But as you and I are aware, as independent educational consultants and professional college counselors, we don't believe in having students apply to a million places, because that just increases the stress. So
exactly,
less is better if you understand what the heck is going on, rather than
that's right,
apply to
absolutely.
places. But yeah, that's another topic for another day. Well, this is awesome. I really love all the information that you've given us and the ucas.com resource for students and families to check out. I also know that UCAS has quite a few videos out on YouTube. So if you want to
Yeah.
learn visually about the colleges, if you're more of a visual video learner, even here on the UCAS page, there are lots of videos and references and connections to all of their social media on the bottom of the website as well. So this is a great resource.
It is. It's an amazing resource. I kind of wish we had something like that in the US, but we don't. So it's not, Common App is not bad, but it's just really more the application platform. It doesn't have everything
Right.
else.
Yeah, there is no one website that encapsulates every college and university in the United States and gives it as
Exactly.
clear and precise and concise information in one website. Because parents often ask me, like, well, where can we learn about all these colleges? And I can say, well, I can give you about 20 websites that you could look
Right.
through. But this allows us to just have one website for the entire UK system, really.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Terry, it's been wonderful having you on the show. As always, I want to give my guests a bit of a soapbox moment, and this is your opportunity to share a few words of wisdom with my listeners and my video watchers and just the world in general. So, what are some words of advice that you would love to share with people?
Words of advice to the world in general. Wow, that's amazing. So
Maybe not that broad.
when it comes to this process, my words of wisdom would be to not stress out about it. There are so many options, and that if a student really does their homework, and doesn't just listen to their neighbor and doesn't just listen to where their friends are going, they can really explore themselves and find some great opportunities, because the next 3 or 4 years of their life, whatever it may be following high school, is such a great time to be able to explore and not just figure that they have to go down a particular path. So that would be my words of wisdom to a student. Be open-minded.
I love it. It's great. Terry from Chartered University Consultants. You can find more information and contact Terry through uscollegeconsulting.com, which is also going to be available in the show notes. I really appreciate you being here and being a part of our show today.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I had such a great time speaking about the UK. Appreciate it.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today, but fear not, we will be back next week with more tips and tricks to help you conquer the college application process like a boss. Until then, remember, don't chuck it up.